Hi and welcome to part 2 of the Zardoz All You Need Is Books book haul for autumn 2023. I think that's what year it is, isn't it? And we're going to look at the anthologies I picked up and also at the upgrades I did, and I'm going to compare the upgrades with the other editions or other copies I've got, just so you can have a look at them, because I've generally gone for ones with different covers. That'll be quite interesting. So these I hadn't seen before. New Worlds of Fantasy, edited by Terry Carr, in Ace, 3 of them. And I say I've never come across these, and they're really great. Look at that cover. I mean, you've got to love that, haven't you? It's so silly. Marvellous. Look at this little guy. I wonder what planet he's from. He's very cool though. And yeah, really, really nice. Step outside your mind. That's a lyric from something, isn't it? Is that from Oasis or something like that? Oh God. Good tinsmiths, those boys, though it has to be said. And Liam does make me laugh, actually. He's a funny guy. But anyway, going back to SF, New Worlds of Fantasy, Terry Carr. I just looked at the names: Zelazny, Brenner, Ballard, Dish, Avram Davison, and many more. And I thought, well, I've sort of got to go for that, really. So we'll have a look inside and see what else is in there. And I glanced through, and you know, there's other good stuff. Ray Russell, wonderful horror writer from the 60s. Catherine MacLean, a good solid female SF writer, mostly active in the 50s. You never hear much about these days. There's a Terry Carr Story, Peter S. Beagle, whose works are being reissued by Gollancz at the moment, the most decent thing Gollancz are doing currently. And you've got a classic ballad, The Lost Leonardo. There's a Keith Roberts. So yeah, so I couldn't sort of leave that, really. It's all good, clean fun. And I looked at the other volumes, and they appear to be even better, as you will see. This was actually the first one I noticed and picked up there, and in lovely condition, as you see. And these are late 60s, I think. Let's have a look at them. They look late 60s. Yeah, this is 1970, and that strange sort of cat demon type thing. And on the cover, name checking Sheckley, Harrison, Zelazny, Robert Bloch. You know, you can't really go wrong with that. So let's have a look inside. There are some other cracking things in here. Keith Roberts' The Scarlet Lady, which I mentioned in the soundtrack video. If you haven't watched that, well, it's your own fault. But I mentioned that The Scarlet Lady was first published, I think, in Impulse in the early 60s. And it's like a dry run for Stephen King's Christine, except, of course, it's a lot better. It's very short. I really do like The Scarlet Lady. It's one of his best stories. And maybe I'll talk about that a bit more, because there is a Keith Roberts video coming up on the channel, which involves me going off on another trip, another journey. If you haven't watched the Keith Roberts video on the channel, do, because in that I go to locations where his novels Pavan and the Chalk Giants are set. There's a Borges in here, a classic Borges, Library of Babel. Marvellous stuff. Bron J Bailey, Joanna Russ, Chris Neville, David Redd, great Welsh SF writer. Fantastic stuff, you know. A lot of things that you wouldn't see much of, so that's really good. And I love that super lurid cover. And here's volume 3 with an even stranger Bem on it. Look at that. That's either a plastic bag around his head or, well, it's not. We know it's not. It's a space helmet, you know, and he's got some sort of implement, which we presume is a weapon. And again, Borges, Zelazny, Peter S. Beagle, Fritz Lieber, Great Tales of the Strange, number 3 in the series. So let's take a look inside that. And yeah, what have we got? Yeah, Peter S. Beagle, R.A. Lafferty, Edgar Pangborn, Victor Kontowski. Don't know him. That's interesting. Okay. Terry Carr Story, Borges Ballad. Yeah, you know, it's all marvellous stuff. So, and a few obscurities in there, so I'll probably read those first. But I thought those were lovely. I haven't researched this series yet. I don't know whether it went on beyond this, so I must have a look, see if there's more out there. But those are great, aren't they? And look at those covers. You can't really go wrong at all. What's it like on the back? Let's have a look. It's very plain on the back of that one. And let's have a look at the other one, because I don't think we showed the back of that one. Yes, we do. We've got your crazy little sort of cat demon guy there, glaring balefully with his toothy grin. So yeah, and lovely. I thought those looked fantastic. So, and it's fantasy, so they're going to be a bit more varied than your average anthology, which will be just SF. Great stuff. So if you see them, snap them up, because I think these are pretty uncommon. Right, and in this little tranche, we of course see the return of the gorgeous pan lozenge, which we know and love. Let's get that framing better, see what we can do. And yeah, 3 anthologies here. This one, this Science Fiction Hall of Fame, I think there were 1 or 2 books in hardcover maybe, or maybe they were bigger sort of things, I'm not sure. I think Sphere did them, and they split them up, and there's 2 volumes of short stories which Silverberg edited, and I think there's 2 or 3 volumes of novellas, and I must try and pick them up actually, because they've got great stuff in them. And the idea was that when the Nebula Award got going, which was about 1966, I think, the Science Fiction Writers of America, who administer the Nebula Award, so it's an award for writers given by writers. So, you know, critically it should be better than the Hugo, and let's not even go near the Hugo today, forget it. Really, the idea was that they would sort of vote for favourites and pick out what they felt were the best stories from genre SF from the magazine age, and then collect them together into these little anthologies. And this is the novellas book 2. And this is not uncommon, it's a bit of a faded spine. These are fairly easy to get, and I would urge you to pick them up. I must pick them up. The only reason I haven't is that in most cases I've read everything in them, or I've got everything in them and I'm getting round to it. But this is really good. There's only 4 novellas in this, and it's got Universe by Robert Heinlein, which is the first part of Orphans of the Sky. The second part is Common Sense, or is it the other way around? I think that's right. And then it's The Ballad of Lost Smell by Cordwainer Smith, which is of course one of the Instrumentality stories, which is a great one. Vintage Season by Kuttner and Moore, which is a fantastic story, and I'm going to be talking about that in the next video that goes up. And With Folded Hands by Jack Williamson, another great story, and I'm going to be talking about them at some length, as I say, because I'm in a bit of a golden age mode. So if you see that, pick it up, because these things are completely seminal. It has to be said, they really are. So I must get the other volumes at some point. It's just a question of finding them in good condition. Then moving on to lozenges, we have Decade the 1940s, edited by Aldis and Harrison, and I have owned this before, but this is a much nicer copy than a previous one I had. And I do have this in hardcover as well. I got it from Dorset Bob last year, or earlier this year I should say. And this is a mixed bag, this one, it has to be said. I mean, Harry and Brian, you know, very safe hands, but some of the stories in this didn't really do it for me. But I mean, it's got Arena by Frederick Brown. If you've seen the Star Trek episode, which is called Arena, which is where Kirk goes up against an alien called the Gorn. It's got like a guy with a dinosaur's head. It's hilarious. And they have to battle it out. They're from different sort of civilizations, and there's this advanced race, and both their spaceships in the same area of space, and they have to fight it out. And whoever sort of wins, you know, will save their race or what have you. I can't remember the exact details, but the original version, which was expanded and altered by Brown for Star Trek, is in this, and it has to be said, Brown's short story is superior. And Frederick Brown is good, you know, he's very funny. I really like his crime stuff, but it's really hard to find. So, you know, if you see any of Frederick Brown stuff, pick it up. And that's the thing in this that leaps out, actually. There's other good things in here. There's the Van Vogt and the Asimov, but really for me it's very much the Frederick Brown Arena that jumps out in there. And I reread that a while ago because I was flicking through the hardcover of this, and you know, really great little story. You know, he's somebody who, I don't think there's anything in print, you know, there really needs to be a best of Frederick Brown reissued in Masterworks or something. Are you listening, Golags? Put aside those silly fantasy series for young people, you know, do something a bit more classic and get people reading the foundations of what we're talking about. That would be nice. Then we've got Decade the 60s, and this is an upgrade. I've got another copy of this, and of course this is nearly all solid good new wave stuff, so I can get rid of the other one. I can pass that on, maybe eBay it. And you know, there's some, you know, the real sort of new wave anthologies from the 60s. There's really great stuff in this. There's a Ballard, The Assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, considered as a downhill motor race, which is his take on Alfred Jarry's book about the crucifixion. Not as a book, it's a short story about the crucifixion as an uphill bicycle race, which inspired Robert Calvert of Hawkwind to write Silver Machine, and we could go on and on. There's really odd things like Harvey Jacobs, Gravity, Vonnegut, Harrison Bergeron, which is a sort of classic Vonnegut story. There's a Mac Reynolds, Tom Dish, Keith Roberts, Pamela Zolin's Heat, Death of the Universe, which is about entropy in one day in the life of a housewife and everything running down. Fantastic radical stuff. The short version of Hawksbill Station by Robert Silverberg, and you've got Day Million by Frederick Poe, Last Hurrah of the Golden Horde, Last Hurrah of the Golden Horde by Norman Spinrad. This is all deathless 60s stuff. You know, you really do need to read these things. They're very important stories and real radical, out there things, expanding the boundaries of the genre, and very beautiful in the lozenge there, as you can see. So I've got another one I can pass on now, which is great news. Time for some Door anthologies. Donald A. Woolheim, and look at these, the great SF stories. There's a huge series of these and you never see them, and Morris had a few there, so I snapped them up, and they're in pretty good nick as well. These, I've got volume 4 or volume 5, which I got from Mike at Fine Edition. Mike sent it to me free, which was really nice of him. Mike's not trading at the moment. Like us, he's having a lot of work done in his house, so he's not online trading currently. So hopefully he'll be back soon, before too long. To which we can only say, look out, bank balance, because Mike's stuff is incredibly toothsome. But yeah, these are great. So each one covers a different year. So number 6 year is 1944, number 8 is 46, and number 9 is 47. Am I going to be a completist on these? No, I'm not. The later ones I don't think are so good, but you do see more of them around. But these are obviously, this is Golden Age and it's cracking stuff. And I'm actually reading this one at the moment, hence the old bookmark there, and there's some really fantastic stuff in this. And last night I read one of my old favorites by C.L. Moore, No Woman Born, which is a great story, very thoughtful stuff and stylistically very beautiful, and there's other cracking things in here. So this is a great way of looking what was happening in the mainstream of the Golden Age there. So you've got things like Far Centaurus by Van Vogt, which is a Generation Starship story, and famous things like Sanity by Fritz Leiber, regarded as one of his best. You've got City by Clifford D. Simak, the early version. Arena by Frederick Brown here again. So there's all sorts of great stuff. Killdozer by Theodore Sturgeon. So really you can't really go wrong. You know, these are things that you've got to read to get your grounding in the Golden Age. And then number 8, which I haven't looked at yet, and they're in good nick, these. They do have a little bit of spine ripple, but they still have nice yellow text blocks, and they're generally in good nick. So we'll have a quick look and see what's in this. Okay, Sturgeon, Clark, 2 Clarks, another Frederick Brown, great. Bradbury and Brackett writing together, Million Year Picnic, which is a classic Bradbury story. Lawrence O'Donnell, Vintage Season. Now Lawrence O'Donnell is Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore, and Vintage Season I've already mentioned in this video, or maybe the previous one. Is a fantastic story. Another Kuttner solo. Look at that, it is really quality stuff. And there's a few obscure names in there I haven't read, so that's going to be great. So that's going to deepen my Golden Age knowledge, and you can't really go wrong with these. And here's number 9 from 1947. So we're edging toward the 50s when everything changed, and I think you'd agree that's rather spiffing. So we'll have a look at what's inside. Let's take a gander. Asimov, Anderson, William 10, you don't hear much about these days. And E for Effort by T.L. Sherrod, which is one of the things that was selected in the shortlist, I think, for the Ben Bova edited Science Fiction Hall of Fame novellas, which I showed you earlier. And I've never read that, and maybe I've read about it, but I don't really know anything about it off the top of my head. With Folded Hands by Jack Williamson, which is also in that, and Lewis Paget, which is Kuttner and Moore, and Sturgeon as well. So it's interesting, flavoursome stuff in those, and I think you'd agree they're very beautiful. And I think, you know, if I ever stopped collecting a format, I think the one thing I might consider carrying on with would be anthologies, as they are great fun to collect, and it does seem to be a trend of it. I know Jules likes them, and I think we all like the idea of the variety they could bring. And of course the genre SF began as short forms. It wasn't novels, it wasn't huge chunky things, it was short stories, you know, and it's very much the way it grew up. And that's where the short story still survives in SF. And you know, there's a lot of bad ones out there, but you know, some of the best SF things I've ever read have been short. So if you haven't read a lot of short science fiction stories, you know, you really do need to do some work on it, because you will find some amazing things, particularly 40s, 50s, 60s. Things start to change a bit in the 70s, but you know, they're really important, because the real test of a prose writer is how well they manage a short story, in my view, I have to say. Right, so here's two later volumes in that series. There's the Great SF Stories 10 from 1948 with a nice white jacket, and this one is really spiffing actually. That's lovely. It looks almost unread. So again, I've not actually looked what's in this yet, so we'll have a quick squint and see what we can see. Kuttner, Mary Lyne said Judith Merrill, That Only a Mother, that's a great story. Judith Merrill, fantastic. Ray Bradbury's Mars is Heaven, oh, swooning bliss. William Tenn, John D. MacDonald, Van Vogt, there's a Frederick Brown, which I don't recognise, I don't think I've read that one. So that's going to be beautiful. And of course, that's just coming up to the end of the Golden Age, so we're nearly on the cusp there. But absolutely lovely. We do love a bit of Daw, don't we? And Daw anthologies, I would rather collect Daw anthologies than almost anything else they did, because as I've said before, you know, they're fun looking books. A lot of them are crud, it has to be said. You know, a lot of them are real low grade stuff. You know, they're not always the best books. It depends what you want, of course, it's a matter of taste, but they didn't exactly push the envelope. And I always remember what Donald A. Wollheim said to Stephen King when Stephen King was trying to get his career going. Not that I'm a massive King fan, but he said in a rejection letter, I think, we at Daw are not interested in negative utopias. He didn't like dystopias. And of course, he's talking about things like The Running Man, I think, the Bachman books. So yeah, so what a goof up he made there, yeah? Then we jump forward to volume 16, 1954, and you don't see many of the 50s ones. This is the same cover art as the pan lozenge of one of the Brian Stableford Hooded Swan books. Is it Promised Land? I'm not sure which one it is. I can't think which one it is, but I do like that artwork. And volume 16, 1954. And it's got the wraparound artwork. Very, very beautiful. This was actually the first one I picked up. And as you can see, this is when Daw have changed. You know, this is the 80s now, I would say, because they changed their livery in the early 80s, which I think was a bit of a fail. They should have stuck with it. Let's see, 1987, and this is number 709. So we'll just have a look at the contents. Let's have a look. Richard Matheson, Black Charlie by Gordon R. Dixon, which is good actually. Dixon I've not read a lot of. He's generally sort of frowned on these days as not being very important, but Black Charlie was a story that surprised me. Randall Garrett, there's a Donald A. Wollheim story in here, this Fondly Fahrenheit by Alfred Bester, which is one of Bester's more favoured stories, but I have to say I think it's quite overrated. I don't think it's a patch on some of the things, other things he did. You know, people go on about it and I don't think it's really that great. It's not one of my favourites. The Cold Equations by Tom Godwin, which when you read it you would think it comes from much earlier, and it's quite a famous story. And the basic idea of Cold Equations is that it's about a girl who stows away in a spaceship, and when she's discovered, the captain has to make a decision because the spaceship is too heavy with her in it, and you know, when it comes into land it's not going to happen, and you know, you can't accommodate the other weight, and the equations prove that. So is he going to jettison her from the craft and what have you? That's the coldness of the equations. And you read it and you think, you know, it's hard to believe it's mid-50s. It's the sort of thing you thought would have come about late 30s, but there you go. Chad Oliver, Pangborn, Algis Budrys, The End of Summer, that's vaguely familiar. PKD, there's an Anthony Boucher, wow. Horace L. Gold. Now Boucher, of course, was the editor of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and Horace L. Gold was the editor of Galaxy, so important stuff there, and a Frederick Brown answer, which I think I've read. That's quite a famous one, I seem to recall. But yeah, that's really beautiful. So I am really enjoying short things at the moment, because I have to say I have struggled with novels of late. Nothing's been really grabbing me, and I've just read a mainstream novel which didn't do a lot for me. So short form is the thing. I've read a lot of non-fiction. I'm always reading a lot of non-fiction, but I am into shorts at the moment, so you probably get quite a bit about short stories coming up. But you know, we'll see, moods change and you swing off into other things, and sometimes things just click. I'm very much a mood reader rather than a firm solid TBR type guy. Closing off the anthology section of this video with two themed anthologies, and one of them I'd never seen before. The other one I used to have a really bad copy of, so it's nice to have this one. And we're going to look first of all at Weird Legacies, which is in Star, who are like the runt of the litter as a sort of British imprint in the 70s and 80s, though they did do some good stuff. You know, my first Charles Bukowski was in Star, Henry Miller, You know, they did a bit of skiffy, but very small list. And this is edited by Mike Ashley, who does the sort of British Library series of SF, and, you know, the history of the science fiction magazine. My God, I mean, this man really knows his stuff. And these are all things from Weird Tales, and I'd not seen this anthology before. And it's in beautiful condition, as you see. Look at that, unbroken spine, not leaning. And it's got that nice typeface, which basically was used a lot by Panther Granado. And there's some good names in there, 60p. And this obviously dates from late 70s. And let's have a look. And what interested me about this was there seemed to be some collaborations in here. So we've got things like Robert E. Howard and Edmund Hamilton, the Planet Smasher, who was Lee Brackett's husband, great golden age space opera guy you never hear much about these days. I know that Matt Defoe has read some recently. There's a collaboration between Clark Ashton Smith and Lynn Carter, which is really strange. I can't imagine two more mismatched people. Clark Ashton Smith, poetic, and Lynn Carter, very straight ahead. Eric Van Russell and Leslie J. Johnson. No, I can't say no. There's a Bradbury. There's a collaboration between Block and Kuttner, which is really exciting. I really want to read that, The Black Kiss. And that is your typical sort of Weird Tales title. So that's Block when he's very young, and I'm a huge Kuttner fan as well. And there's a collab between Lovecraft and Derleth, which I probably read, The Survivor. And of course, a lot of those are things that Derleth finished off after Lovecraft passed away. And I think you'll agree that's got a really great jacket as well, with this sort of infernal angel come snake or whatever he is on the cover. And then we have Mother Was a Lovely Beast, which is from Pyramid, and it's a thematic anthology edited by Philip Jose Farmer about feral kids, feral children. Of course, Mowgli in the Jungle Book by Kipling's a feral kid. Tarzan, John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, another feral kid. And then you have historical figures like, say, maybe Caspar Hauser. I always think of Caspar Hauser. Was he a feral kid? Was he raised by animals, or was he just locked away? He was locked away, but he had a thing for horses, didn't he? So there we go. But yeah, this is an uncommon book generally. I did have my eyes on a hardcover one on Abe. It's quite expensive and I would quite like it, but you know, you never see this book in really good nick, and you don't see it very often at all. Absolutely lovely. And I have read it, but a long time ago. And Farmer, of course, being a big Burroughsian, and by that we mean Edgar Rice Burroughs, was obsessed with the idea of the feral kid from childhood. And each of these stories has a foreword by PJF, and it's got extracts from the memoirs of Lord Greystoke, which is a fantastic little short story from the Wold Newton universe. And there's a Gene Wolfe, Mac Reynolds, and other writers who are less familiar. And I have read this, but a long time ago, and I can't remember much about it. So I don't think I was blown away by it, but it's a great idea for a thematic anthology. And I am keen on thematic anthologies. And it's got a lovely cover there with the ape cradling the human baby. So that's a sort of Tarzan inference there. So I was really pleased to get that. Okay, so that's the anthologies end of things wrapped up. So what we look at now is the upgrades, and we're going to do some edition comparisons, which should be interesting, because you can see what I've gone for and why I've gone for it, and talk to you a bit about those books and my sort of thinking about the process of that. And we're going to have my original copies, as it were, on the left, and we'll start with Tau Zero by Poul Anderson, and we'll have the new copies on the right. So straight away there, here we have the 1973 edition of Tau Zero by Poul Anderson, and then we have, I think this one's 1980, both Coronet. They have exactly the same blurb on the back, I noticed. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, this is the second impression from 1980, and that's the first impression, so 7 years between them. And this one's got all sorts of coffee stain ringware. Look at that, people have put their mugs and things on it. And this is one of my favourite Andersons. It's a hard SF story. There's a Gollancz masterwork, and it's about a colony ship heading off to a distant planet, and things go wrong, and the ship sort of gains momentum and accelerates, and before you know it you get time dilation coming in and it ends up in a different universe, and it's exciting, fast moving stuff. So if you like hard SF, it's one to go for. So I decided to upgrade because I've never really liked that cover. It's never felt appropriate to me, and it's in a bit of a state. So I saw this at Zardoz, Allyouneedisbooks, and it had to be done. A more conventional cover, I admit, but it's in much better condition, and as I say, same blurb on the back, and yeah, I like it. So I must reread that sometime, because it's a real favourite in the Anderson canon, not just for me but for fans generally. So here are 2 copies of the same edition of the Drowned World, and this one here is the one I've had for many years, and it's bagged as you see, but it's got quite a lean to the spine and it's got quite a bit of wear, and this will go on eBay because that's an uncommon one. It's Bruce Pelham, and this was my upgrade, which is much better nick, and say Morris give me a really good price on that. And that of course is an epochal new wave novel where the central character in this, a chap called Kerens, instead of fighting against the catastrophe, realizes that he wants it psychologically, and he basically goes with the flow. And that was a real shocking thing at the time, so I'm really pleased to be upgrading that. So some of these sort of spares will really go to friends, 1 or 2 will go on eBay, so I'll give you a nod on the community page when that's happening if you're interested in any of these books. But yeah, it's rather good to sort of be upgrading, and that is something which had bugged me for quite a long time. And I've got, let me see, I've got a Gollancz Yellow Jacket of the Drowned World, not the first edition. I've got a folio. I did have the Liverite 50th anniversary edition, which I moved on recently, so it is a sort of keynote book for me really. And what we're doing this time, of course, is going alphabetically. And you saw in the first part of the video that I bought this Pelham copy of The Drought, and I referenced the fact that I have other editions, and this is my Panther one, which I bought new back in the early 80s, and is still really beautiful. And that's a Foss cover, and the Foss covers on the ballads in this period are quite uncommon, and this is really sort of beautiful paperback, one of my favorite A format paperbacks, which is why it's bagged. And as I've said, one of my favorite ballad books. Lovely. So to have both of those classic iconic covers in fantastic liveries, the Penguin livery and the Panther Granado, and it's just an absolute joy, because Ballad is one of my key people. There's going to be a new Ballad video coming up on the channel in November, little expedition I'm going on. You'll see that coming up. I'm looking forward to shooting that, and that should have quite a few guest authors in it, which should be good. Then sticking with the new wave, we have the very wonderful Bron J Bailey and the Zen Gun, and this is the UK Methuen edition, which was in print when I started book selling, and I was selling it occasionally. Bron J Bailey, I don't know what it is. I mean, you still see quite a few secondhand, and people just don't seem to get him at all, and I think he's amazing. And he pretty much stuck to pulp forms. He co-wrote story with Michael Moorcock under the name Mike Barrington, and he did a lot of work for New Worlds. His most experimental work was for New Worlds, but he pretty much stayed within sort of pulp genre SF, you know, and some people say that that was his weakness and he should have gone out of it. But really, he's the sort of English SF writer who is really important, because in a way I see him as a precursor of M. John Harrison. He's very florid and baroque and ornate, and the books are short and sharp, and you can see the influence of people like Bester and Kuttner and the right sort of people from the golden age in the 1950s. And if you like pure SF, they're just great. You know, the Zen Gun's a really odd one, very odd. Michael Moorcock says on the cover, the most original SF writer of his generation, and that's almost certainly true, certainly in Britain, because I think he was a bit older than Moorcock and co. And when you look at the other people who were writing for Ted Carnell's New Worlds before Moorcock came on board, which I think was 64, you know, a lot of them, they're just imitating American models. And even though those influences are there in Bailey, there is something else, and there's real colour and verve and energy. And I would urge anybody who likes pure science fiction, pure genre SF, to read him, because he's fantastic, and sadly long dead, I'm afraid. So what you see there is the Door edition of the Zen Gun, which is much nicer. I've never been keen on this Methuen one, and I haven't read this book, you know, for donkey's years. So that's really good. Look, the novel about the ultimate weapon that can ever exist, the subhuman who found it and tried to use it, the beasts who manned humanity's last Starfleet. So there's a kind of Cordwainer Smith thing there now I think about it, because there are talking animals. Yeah, it's sort of coming back to me, and it's sort of all there really. So if you like instrumentality, Cordwainer Smith, give that a go. But I would say any Bailey you come across you should pick up, because they're really good. And the ones I see a lot out and about are The Grand Wheel, which is the sort of thing that Philip K. Dick or Barry Milesburg would have done, a book about an intergalactic game, interstellar game, or is it interplanetary? I think it's an interplanetary game. It's a long time since I've read it. The Garments of Sayan is in my book 100 must-read science fiction novels. I reviewed it on the channel a while ago. There used to be a Barrington J. Bailey video on the channel, but I put it because I can do a new one. But he really is fantastic, so I was pleased to see that, because I'd never seen the Door edition, so that's an upgrade. So the Methuen goes on, probably to my friend Nick, I'd imagine. Then we have one of the more interesting farmer singletons, Jesus on Mars, and a while ago I picked this up. I think I picked that up in Hay, and that's quite a nice one, and that's a pinnacle one, because I used to have this Panther one and I got rid of it. Like I said, I got rid of loads of my farmers, and I always wish I'd kept that. It's quite hard to find in this condition, and I love that jacket. And it's about an expedition to Mars, and I seem to recall that the captain of the ship, or the leader of the expedition, gets kidnapped by the local aliens, as they do. And there is a figure, there's this being there who the aliens say is Jesus, and I can't remember a lot more about it, but with a title like Jesus on Mars, you can't go wrong really. It's really quite something, isn't it? And I'll be keeping this one. That's the new one. This one is really nice though, and I'm tempted to hang on to it because it's in such good nick, and maybe it'll become my reading copy, because as you'll have seen, I talk a lot about rereading because I love rereading. And many of these books, which, I'm showing you, I haven't read for such a long time, because, unlike a lot of people on BookTube doing SF, I'm older than most of them. And some of these things, I burned through loads of books in the sort of 70s and 80s, and I haven't gone back to them since. Others I have. So the channel is really good for me in terms of getting me to reread and rediscover things, because part of my retirement plan, when I retire, which is a good sort of 4 or 5 years away, I suppose, is to do a lot of rereading. So I'm sort of getting it in early really, because I'm also thinking I want to reread A formats where my eyes are still reasonably good, because you get older, and then I can read the Royals and the Demis, the big hardcovers later. So yeah, but I'm really pleased with that, because that's an iconic cover and one that I used to stock and sell in the 80s. So it really hits me in the nostalgia sort of parts, the parts which cannot be reached otherwise by the contemporary. So what I've got here, I've got sort of like a keep pile, and I've got the sort of move on pile, which is the sort of move on pile is looking quite small so far. And there's several things I've got 2 copies of, and one really should work harder at moving things on. But let's just have a look at what we've got here. And this is Dark Universe by Daniel F. Galloy. And you'll notice that this Sphere edition, which is earlier, is just Dan Galloy. And this is a later Hamlin one, and as I've said, I do like Hamlin. This looks like a brush emerging from the earth, but of course, as you see, it's hydraulics lifting up a concealed entrance to a down under, as Harlan Ellison would say. And this is great stuff. This is about really the characters live in darkness, and it's quite a mysterious book. I won't tell you any more, you should read it. And I picked this one up a while ago, and it does have a bit of a lean, but it's really nice sphere, but the lean is putting me off. So we'll see, because it's a visible lean that I can see whenever I look in the shelf, but it's got rather nice cover as well, so we shall see about that. Now, he's somebody I've not read for a long time, and he's probably underrated. And the German film World on a Wire, which I think is Fassbender, isn't it, is based on one of his stories, which I've never seen that film. I must pick it up, but I'm trying to get rid of Blu-rays and DVDs at the moment because I just can't move, and I've got a plan to sort of narrow things down a bit in the hideout. I've been selling lots of LPs because you just end up with loads of space. I'm not one of these guys with a sort of huge library and a huge income, but that's what being a bookseller all your life gets you, I guess. Okay, 2 apparently identical Doris Perers, and my advice to you is, if you see a Doris Perers book, buy it, especially if it's in good nick, because they're quite uncommon. A lot of them were never published in the UK, only the early ones, which are probably the best known ones. This one I only got a while ago. I think I got this from Derek Adaman at Hay on Wye, and it was relatively cheap, because Derek usually knows his stuff, but there is some wear in the top corner, there's some creasing and bending, and the same on the back, so that will go on eBay. And look at that cover, they don't make them like that anymore. Maybe that's a good thing. But Morris had this nicer copy, which has the more of the yellow text blocks, not quite as faded, much nicer on the back. I haven't given her a clean yet. And Persearch is a funny one. I mean, she really, really is. And she lived to be really old. She was in her 90s when she died, and she was active late 60s through to sort of early 80s. Most of her books were Door. And what she's really good at, she's really good at these sort of flaky alien sort of creatures and things. And very often the things that would normally be in the background of a novel, you know, that form part of the world building, with her foregrounded, and the characters sometimes recede a bit behind the foreground. I didn't find that so much with her early stuff, but that seems to happen more and more with her. But look at that, Doom Time, the War of the World Trees. And, you know, she really does have an interesting flavour. It's rather unusual. Is it sweet or is it savoury? All I can say is that it's alien, and for that reason alone, you know, you really should embrace her. So watch out for her stuff, and do pick it up if you can. The Star Rider, I think, is the second or third one. That's about the best one I've read. I've got a ton of them. I've only read a few so far, so she's a fairly recent sort of discovery for me, but I do like her stuff. And when you sort of want something that's genuinely SF novel, like Bron J Bailey, that sticks within the genre but does interesting and colourful and touchy-feely things, then you can't really go wrong with Doris. She's the girl. Now we come on to a book which I'm very passionate about. I do need to reread it. I've mentioned it a couple of times on the channel. My basic feeling about it is that it is the most underrated and neglected genre SF novel of the 1980s, and this is Frontera by Lewis Shiner. Now I think there's a print-on-demand edition, which might be Subterranean Press of all things, but it's a big horrible floppy trade paperback, as these things often are. And what Subterranean should do is they should issue a hardcover of it, because there's never been a hardcover. And what you've got here is the UK first and only edition from Sphere, which is about 87, and I didn't read it at the time, and you know, I've never forgiven myself. I didn't read this until after I wrote 100 must-read science fiction novels, and had I read it at that point, it would have gone in there. It's very abrasive and tough, and if you imagine something like the film of Total Recall, but you imagine if the film of Total Recall, and I'm talking about the Verhoeven one, if you imagine if it was actually good as opposed to being silly, and combine that with the attitude of David Cronenberg's Scanners and the kind of arid, tough prose and attitude and momentum of K.W. Jeter, that's what you've got. Shiner's great, you know, everything he does is different. This is his only really pure genre SF novel, and it's brilliant. And what we've got here on this side is the first edition, and Mission to Mars, Rescue Operational Pirate Raid. And this is from Bayon. I just want to look to see if this is a first printing. Let's just have a look. And yeah, it is 1984. And I would say pick up any copy of this you can get. It took my head off. It doesn't hold anything back. It takes no prisoners. And there's wonderful sequences where this guy goes on this mission to Mars, and he's in this space capsule that's kind of lashed together and falling apart, shades of Barry and Malmsberg. And when he gets there, well, I'm not going to tell you, but it's just really something. A very tough, harsh book, and I absolutely love it. So if you ever see Frontera in any edition, pick it up. I'm keeping both of these, as I'm very fond of the Sphere one. It brings back memories and makes me think, you know, you looked at it, you didn't buy it at the time, you should have. And it says dazzling first novel from major new SF talent, and I didn't read it, which was really stupid of me. So there you are. Quite happily admit to being stupid about that one. And to have a first is great, because you know it's quite uncommon. So if you see it, guys, please pick it up. It's one of the great neglected books, up there with Dr. Ada, so you really must have it in your collection. Now the next thing's quite interesting, because these are books which are from my current collection. These are not upgrades. It's Those Who Watch by Robert Silverberg and Thorns. And Those Who Watch is an early Silverberg, but it's a really good one. And I think it's in the Subterranean Omnibus Among Strangers, which I bought a while ago, which also has Tom of Bedlam and The Man in the Maze. I made a video about The Man in the Maze, one of my favourite Silverbergs, and that came up on the channel about a month and a half ago. And this is a really, really good one. And Thorns is a more famous book and is regarded as his breakthrough novel. I personally think it happened a little bit before that. And it's a very tough, bitter book. I know that David Pringle felt that it was too bitter and too harsh. And the other one from that period that has a similar kind of quality to it, that cheese grater on your skin quality, is, I'd say, The Second Trip. That's a tough one as well. But why have I got these out? Well, interestingly, something I picked up at Zardoz was this, which is an omnibus of the two together. And this is NEL. And as you see, let me just move that copy of Thorns there, put those two together. So you can see you've got the cover of Those Who Watch there. And that's the classic UK cover of Thorns, which I think is a Pennington again, and with this little crazy guy on there. But it's really great nick, and I'd never seen this omnibus edition before. Look at that. 2 complete novels from Silverberg, 1 great read for mankind. That's the way to do it. Invoke Apollo. So I am attached to this because I've had it for a long time, and you don't see it very often. It is in good nick. So this is kind of an indulgence, really. So I'm probably going to keep this copy of Thorns and this copy of Those Who Watch. Well, that'll mean then that I've got 3 copies of Those Who Watch. And the thing is, 2 of them will be in omnibuses. So I kind of feel I need to keep that, really. But this is so good. Look at that. Really nice nick. And, you know, there are a few of these things done in the 70s, but I'd never ever seen that before. So I've got to have that, because you know me and Bob, we're pretty close, we're chums. I wish we were met him once, of course, but you know, I'm a huge apologist for his work, as you know. So I thought that was really lovely. Back into the straight comparison thing, and we have Brian Stableford's Balance of Power, Brian M. Stableford I should say, and that's door number 332. Is it 332? No, I'm thinking of Thomas Endish. 322. And you've got the Hamlin one on the right, which is the new one I picked up. I've always preferred the cover door with these wacky covers. I mean, you've got to love them, haven't you? And it's the 5th landing of the Daedalus mission. There are 6 books in the series, and it's a kind of, you know, go places where no one's gone before, and the crew of the Daedalus, the spaceship, they land on different planets, and there's different issues, and they're often biological things, and you know, they're great. You know, they're really good little series. I've read a few of them. I haven't read them all. I haven't actually read this one, and I think I'm going to let that go, even though I do have some others in that series indoor, and it's a question of having a uniform livery across all 6. And do I really care? I quite like being rebellious and not having a matching livery, just to show the richness of things across publishers. But I've always loved this cover. There's a little bit of a ding there, but this is the nicest copy of this I've seen, and there's a sort of plainness and simplicity to the Hamlins from the late 70s, early 80s that I really love. And as I say, Stableford is best, is fantastic. So I think probably that's going to move on. It's got a lovely unfaded spine line, so that does rather incline me to hold on to it. But it's going to be a space decision, because of course you saw the haul the other day, the unhaul, as I laughingly should say. And you know, I got rid of some stuff and made some money, and I've spent some of it on this. Morris gave me really good prices, as he does. And the thing is, again, I'm up against it again now. I just can't move, so I've got to look at what I can move on, and I probably will donate some things to friends. So, and I'm trying to talk the video we're doing to let me build a new sort of area for A formats. I've got a space, so I've just got to kind of, you know, sort of get a sweet talker really and see what I can do and use strategy. Haha. Zelazny, Jack of Shadows, immortalized in song by Hawkwind in the song Jack of Shadows from PXR5, which is an odd little record that came out in 79. It was bits and pieces put together. They didn't quite finish. They split up, they got back together, changed the name to Hawklords. And it's a great song, really great song. And it's probably a better song than a book, to be honest. I've never really liked this cover from Corgi with this crazy bat. But so that's going to go, definitely. But this is far classier, and I sign it there. A gripping new adventure of a mighty hero's battle with the forces of decay. It's almost like a superhero thing in a funny sort of way. But, you know, it's a minor book, but it is more about the association with the song. But I saw that and I thought, come to me, and I can let that go. That's seen some action. Oh, it's got some terrible foxing there, dreadful. And what's that in the middle of it? Has it got an ad? Look at that. It's got an ad for the Prudential Insurance in the middle. And that's an uncommon thing in a British book. You come across these in American books from the 60s and 70s. Look at that. You tear that off, you fill it in, you get insured. So what date is this from? Let's have a look. This has got to be 74, 72 in Faber. so it's not as late 70s I always think it is. So that's definitely going to go, and that's definitely going to stay. Finally, the should I stay or should I go dilemma again is Roadmarks by Roger Zelazny. Again, I've always loved this cover. This is an odd little book. This is probably my favourite late Zelazny, and to me late Zelazny is late 70s. After that I don't really have a lot of interest. I like the first 5 Amber books. Beyond that, let's not go there. And Roadmarks is a good one. It's the only book I've ever read where a character uses a book of Baudelaire's poetry as a weapon. And I know I've mentioned it before. It's the one thing that really sticks in my head. And I've always loved this cover. And I would like a McDonald UK hardcover of it, but it's like hen's teeth. And, you know, you've got to find one first, then you've got to find one in good nick, and then you've got to pay for it. So, you know, God. But if I ever see one, man, I'm going to get it. But Roadmarks is a time travel story, and it's about somebody traveling along this road. And if you drive along this desert road, then what happens is you travel through time, and it's got this really clever structure where chapter 1 is called chapter 1, chapter 2 is called chapter 2, chapter 3 is called chapter 1, chapter 4 is called chapter 2, and so on. So you get chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 1, chapter 2, all the way through, and different things happen in them. But it's a really good little literary device for making you think about how text and flashback, flash forward and time travel is something you can do in a book in the same way as you can in a film, you know. So it's great stuff, and I do like the dragon on there, and I like that, so I'm probably going to keep it. I'm trying not to keep too many dupes these days, and I've got like a little dupes box, and usually the excuse is that they're reading copies. But both of these are so nice. I mean, the idea of a reading copy for me is that I can crack the spine and relax and read it, which I don't normally do. I look after my stuff. But it's not going to happen with either of these, but we'll see. So, you know, at some point, maybe I'll get the hardcover. Will I ever reread it? I don't know, really. Like I said, I want to revisit him. He's not a major figure for me. It is about the early stuff. But it has been a while, you know, and I feel maybe I should do something on the channel about him and sort of try and come up with a reader's guide or something. But that will require some research, which is the sort of thing I like to do these days. So there we go, the should I stay or should I go video part of this two-parter, this sort of Zardoz All You Need Is Books book haul. And the sort of stay part is huge and the go part is tiny. So gosh, so I think basically the Ballad and the Persetia will definitely go on eBay at some point, and the others I think will go to my friend Nick because he's building his A format collection. At some point I want to get around to his house and film his A format collection so you can see how that's getting on, because he hasn't been doing it very long, but he's had some good scores and he's got in with some of the sort of best sort of places in Bath to sort of pick things up. So this is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now. There'll be another video hopefully later this week if I can get it together, and that will be looking at some golden age stuff and some rereads I'm doing and some pointing you in certain directions with a couple of important writers and short stories. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to super thanks, tip me if you want to support the channel, and goodbye for now and best of luck with your own book hunting. Cheers.